Got it?
Yeah, we're recording.
Okay, great. Okay, welcome everyone. We're so thrilled to have you for this webinar, which we've entitled Gender Matters, Using a New Language to Better Understand Intermarriage and Engagement. And we have some excellent scholars here today who can help enlighten us on this really essential topic. And you're going to hear a little bit more about the hubbub we've been seeing around these issues just in the past few days as we introduce our new program here at Hebrew College, which you will be hearing a lot about today and hopefully a lot in the future. So let me take a few minutes to introduce both our presenter and our respondent, both esteemed colleagues in the field who really specialize in this area and I think are going to help bring this all to light for us. So first, our presenter, Dr. Karen McGinnity, is an educator who specializes in Jewish intermarriage and gender. And in that role, she's the founding director of the Love and Tradition Institute. She's also directing our new Interfaith Family Jewish Engagement program here at Hebrew College with master's and certificate programs. She's been a research associate at Brandeis, University of Michigan, work at Brown. She's really been all over the academic map and all over the map of the U.S., sharing her books, Marrying Out and Still Jewish, one of which was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award, and the other which was the first gender history of intermarried Jewish men. So her work has been incredibly groundbreaking. On a personal note, I knew Dr. McGinnity when she and I were joined together when we were both doctoral students. I was at Brandeis, she was at Brown, and we were part of a small Jewish and Gender Studies roundtable that we co-created, and it's really fun to be back in these professional roles in this next stage of our academic lives together. Responding to Dr. McGinnity's work will be Rabbi Adam Shalom. Adam is the Dean for North America of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, and also in his spare time, Rabbi of Kol Chadash Humanistic Congregation outside of Chicago. A big part of Rabbi Shalom's work is serving intermarried families, helping them from child rearing, all the way to the other end of the life cycle, and also training rabbis and educators to really create a vibrant and diverse Jewish future. So we thank you for being here as a respondent, and I'm going to hand over the controls over to Dr. McGinnity. One word I want to say, in addition, as I said before, we'd love all of your questions after the presentations, but if you don't mind muting your mic during them, it will really help with feedback. The other practical note is if you have a question, please feel free to, there's a hand raising function. There's also a chat box. So we will keep an eye on both of those, and feel free also just to, call out. But if you want to not feel like you can't get a word in, we want to make sure you can. So please use the chat box or the hand raise. We really want to hear all your voices. So handing it over, thank you so much for being with us.
Deb, just before Karen comes in. We're going to, I'm just going to make a small announcement. I'm Michael Shire, I'm the Dean of the Schulman School here at Hebrew College, and just before Karen starts, just wanted to make a very timely announcement that some of you may have seen, that Hebrew College is going to be receiving a grant from the Avenues to Jewish Engagement for intermarried couples and their families in honor of the 2015 Genesis Prize, in honor of the Genesis Prize laureate Michael Douglas. This was announced yesterday in New York. Michael Douglas, who many of you will know, a famous actor, decided to put his funds that he received as part of the Genesis Prize into a matching grant initiative for the Jewish Funders Network, and Hebrew College is delighted to be able to be one of the 28 recipients across 7 countries who will be using these funds to develop the work of working with interfaith and intermarried families. Our work, as you know, is to develop a master's degree concentration and a graduate certificate. And I'm delighted that Karen is working with us in this area as director of this program. So we're absolutely delighted to be a recipient of this extremely prestigious award. We feel that it contributes to the significance of our work and, of course, to the unique nature of our work, since we are the only graduate institute in the Jewish educational world offering this concentration and certificate. So without further ado, with great delight, I'm going to hand you over to Karen.
Thank you, Dr. Skolnick-Einhorn, and thank you, Rabbi Adam Shalom, for being our respondent today. Thanks to all of you who have joined us for this webinar. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to learn along with you. And before I actually get started on the formal part of the presentation, I want to give a shout out to two colleagues, Helen Kim and Noah Levitt at Whitman College, whose faces are those that appear on our screen at the moment as the starting slide, and also that appear on the Interfaith Families Jewish Engagement webpage. And I appreciate their generosity and their graciousness, and also to just put a plug in for their nearly hot-off-the-press book available this summer called Jew-Asian, which I believe is a must-read for everyone interested in intermarriage and gender. A Jewish girl calls up her mother, and the following conversation ensues. Mama, I'm married. Mazel tov, that's wonderful. But Mama, my husband is a Catholic. So, not everyone is a Jew. But Mama, he's a Negro. What of it? The world has all kinds. We've got to be tolerant. But Mama, he has no job. No, that's all right. But Mama, we have no place to stay. Oh, you'll stay right here in this house. But where, Mama? There's no room. Well, you and your husband can sleep in the bedroom, and Papa will sleep on the sofa. Yes, but Mama, where will you sleep? Oh, don't worry about me, darling. As soon as I hang up the phone, I'm going to drop dead. The vignette I just told was actually a Jewish joke that appeared in 1958, depicting the coexisting tensions regarding pluralism and intermarriage in post-war Jewish American culture. I share this dialogue because it also illustrates the family dynamics and gender around intermarriage. By gender, I mean the roles attributed to the sexes and the power relationship between them. Intermarriage, like all marriage, is a relationship of power, and gender is a primary way of signifying this relationship. The man's unemployment means he's unable to be the provider, the persistent primary role of American men. The Jewish woman will stay home. The Jewish mother is mortally wounded by the daughter's intermarriage, while the father will simply sleep it off. What does the scenario suggest about Jewish gender roles? What does it tell us about the transmission of Judaism and Jewish identity? We can read into this vignette that the children of this intermarriage will be presumed Jewish due to matrilineal descent. But what if the Jew in the marital equation is a man whose offspring would not be considered Jewish by denominations that do not accept patrilineal descent? Responsible for doing the Jewish parenting in an intermarriage, whether it's the Jew, the male or the female, or the mother, they're Jewish, or of another faith or cultural background. What happens in the cases of same-sex interfaith marriage? I'd like to share with you what I learned researching and writing 2 books about Jews, gender, and intermarriage, with the explicit goal of raising awareness about how and why gender matters in heterosexual couples, and how Jewish educators can influence the meaning of intermarriage. I hope we'll take up some of what I don't cover in my 20-minute portion during the Q&A. At times, I'll use the word Gentile. My usage is intended as neutral for someone who isn't Jewish, and not to negate anyone, but frankly because saying a person of another faith and or cultural background gets to be a mouthful after a while. Although much has been said and written about Jewish intermarriage, very little scholarship has looked at change over time or gender to explain experience and identity. Negative assumptions persist, equating intermarriage with assimilation, loss of Jewish identity and communal involvement, and marital dissolution. These assumptions neglect to take into account the appeal of Judaism and the tenacity of Jewishness. Gregory, son of a Catholic mother and a Jewish father, and an intermarried father himself, former host of NBC's Meet the Press, informs us, "I feel more Jewish now than I ever have in my life." Rabbi Lawrence Kushner once wrote, "Spiritual and cultural strength is measured not by rigidity or power, but by vitality and flexibility of the response." My grandfather eloped with a Presbyterian woman who subsequently chose to become Jewish. Both her grandsons and her granddaughter are rabbis. Their family history, like that of actor and producer Michael Douglas, in this beautiful illustrated here, this three-generational photograph to honor his son's bar mitzvah, truly illustrates intermarriage and gender in contemporary American Jewish life. By taking a longitudinal approach, both chronologically and over the life course, and using gender as a primary category of analysis, I'm arguing that a new paradigm for understanding the meaning of intermarriage emerges. A better understanding of intermarriage fosters a more learned response to interfaith families and increases the efficacy of Jewish engagement. Illustrating the dual influences of feminism. That slide. Back. All right. Here we are on the slide. The dual influence of feminism, Jewish feminism in particular, and ethnic revivalism. Women who intermarried in the 1960s and 1970s were considerably more adamant about their being Jewish, with few exceptions, than those who intermarried earlier in the century. Thus, while some Jewish women were comfortable marrying a Gentile, they were not comfortable being mistaken for one. And this objection, the potential of being mistakenly identified as a non-Jew, marks a significant change from some of the women who intermarried at mid-century and did not proactively identify as Jewish, admitting to being Jewish only if asked. The intensified association between a woman's name and her Jewish identity was part of the historical context of Jewish feminism, in which increasing numbers of women came forward to claim their religious and ethnic heritage. Marrying a Gentile combined with motherhood raised most women's consciousness about Jewish identity and about Judaism. And on the slide, you'll see images of the National Organization for Women, Betty Friedan, Miriam's cup that was placed on the Passover table, as well as the first three rabbis in Reform, Reconstructionist, and conservative movements illustrating Jewish feminism. Jewish women who intermarried between 1980 and 2000 were among an unprecedented number of Jews who married Gentiles, and yet they embraced the historically gendered notion of the Jewish woman as the maternal keeper of the domestic flame of Judaism. Most of these Jewish women believed that it was their responsibility to instill an understanding of Jewish history and culture, if not Judaism, in their children. And having children made the intermarried Jewish women I interviewed decidedly more proactive about making Jewish connections, about observance, and about Jewish education. In the 1980s and 1990s, intermarried Jewish women increasingly made sure, even more so than their predecessors who had intermarried in the 1960s and 70s, that their children received more Jewish religious and cultural education than they themselves had had. And here I think about a woman who described to me growing up without any observance or practice regarding Shabbat. Her family did nothing to make Shabbat different or special than the rest of the week. And after she intermarried, she began lighting Shabbat candles. And it was her parents who accused her of being a religious fanatic. Whereas some women who intermarried in the 1960s and 70s disassociated Jewish education from Jewish identity, women who intermarried at the end of the 20th century were considerably more committed to Jewish identification through education. Women who intermarried in the 1980s and 90s seemed less convinced than their predecessors that their children's Jewish identity was absolute or dependent on matrilineal descent. Whether their children would be Jewish depended intimately on the choices women made about Jewish education and lifestyle. The history of some intermarried Jewish women over the period of a century dismantles assumptions about intermarriage and lack or loss of Jewish identity. By using the lens of gender, it became evident that intermarried Jewish women actually became more interested in Jewishness and more invested in perpetuating Judaism over the 20th century rather than less. Although intermarried Jewish women illustrate some of American women's gains toward equality with men, greater education, and employment opportunities, they also demonstrate the tenacity of gendered behaviors when it came to domesticity and religion. Intermarried Jewish women certainly had careers and more responsibility for child-rearing and domestic religion than did their Gentile husbands, illustrated by the current slide. By voluntarily doing all of the necessary planning and most of the physical labor involved in religious observance and cultural participation, they thereby reinforce the social expectation of women as the purveyors of Judaism that was increasingly practiced in the home in addition to or instead of the synagogue. So where does that leave us in terms of intermarried Jewish men? Is the upside of being an intermarried Jewish woman the silver lining where she has more power and influence over her family's religious and cultural life, the downside of being an intermarried Jewish man? A current argument regarding intermarriage in America is that Jewish husbands are ambivalent about Judaism and less proactively vocal than their Gentile wives about how children will be raised. According to one sociologist, quote, intermarried men who have negative feelings about Jews and Jewishness are the weak link in contemporary American Jewish life, end quote. The fact is that the majority of American Jews do not report that religion is very important to them, and yet intermarried Jewish men continue to be singled out as having the least interest. The more crucial issue regarding intermarriage is not how the individuals involved identified, but actually how their children are raised and what that means for the future of the Jewish people. The Pew Research Center 2013 finding that only 20% of intermarried parents are raising their children as Jewish by religion confirm the glass half or less than half empty mindset, while the fact that 61% are raising children with a Jewish identity of any sort confirm the more than half full thinking. The fact that the proportion of adult Jews with intermarried parents has increased is a direct reflection of the increase in the rate of intermarriage over time, from less than 17% among Jews who married before 1970 to 58% among Jews who married in 2000 or later. Now, fortunately, Pew affords us a new way of looking at the children of intermarriage. From the older to the younger generation, the proportion of adult children of intermarriage identifying as Jewish steadily increased, from the baby boomers to Generation Xers to the millennials. Extant scholarship about the children of intermarriage contends that more Jewish children are raised by Jewish mothers married to Gentile fathers than Jewish fathers married to Gentile mothers. and I'm pulling up a slide here that points to 3 studies illustrating the consensus around this issue. I realize the numbers may be a little bit small depending on one's screen, but to just give you the understanding that in each of the studies, the National Jewish Population Study, 2000-2001, A Flame Still Burns by the Jewish Outreach Institute, now Big Tent Judaism, and the Millennial Children of Intermarriage Study by the Cohen Center, all illustrate that more children of intermarried Jewish mothers are raised Jewish than intermarried Jewish fathers. So hold on to that idea for just a moment, that consensus. That consensus aside, the majority of Jewish men I studied, from those who married at mid-century, mid-20th century, to those who married in the new millennium, were adamant about their children being raised Jewish, whether or not their wives converted to Judaism. Keith Soller described the conversation he had with his betrothed. When we got married, I made the point to her that if you don't want to convert, that's up to you, but all of our children are going to be Jewish. Another told his betrothed, look, if we have children, they have to be Jewish, otherwise the deal is off. I have to get married in the synagogue. You can do what you want. Intermarried men also determined that their own children's identities would be Jewish without citing the patrilineal descent decision adopted by the Reconstructionist and Reform movements in 1968 and 1983, respectively. We see him as Jewish, one father commented about his and his wife's view of their son. George Mays described how extended family members, however, did not consider his children Jewish, and as a result, they would not be given aliyot at their cousin's bar mitzvah. Given that his children became b'nai mitzvah and self-identify as Jewish, he contended, they are as Jewish as the next Jew. But fighters and being doers are 2 different things. Traditional gender behaviors continue to influence American family life, including men's available time for parenting. There are certainly more dual-career couples today than a half-century or more ago, and the concept of equal parenting has at least begun to take root, and I would add in some parts of the country more than others. Those Jewish men who married in the latter half of the 20th century wanted to be different kinds of parents than their fathers were, resisting sometimes the corporate ladder to devote more time to being with their children. While the reemergence of what historians have dubbed new fatherhood of the 1970s and 1980s helped men legitimize spending more time with their families, it unfortunately did not fully reconstruct gender roles to create true equity in domestic or paid labor. Although some of the men were able to craft careers that allowed for flexible schedules so that they could be more involved with their children's daily lives, and I'd like to emphasize these men seemed happier as a result of being able to strike that balance. The male breadwinner ethic continues to prevail. When asked how they envision their role as a man, a husband, a father, many men responded with the words, to provide. Men who intermarried in the mid-1970s and 1980s used the term partnership and two-career marriage, a change from the predecessors who intermarried in the 1950s and 1960s, certainly. However, for the majority of men in all age and marriage cohorts, being the provider was still their primary defining role. Even those men who strove to share equally in the domestic tasks often admitted that their wives still did more around the house, while they spent more hours working outside of it. And their wives, who I spoke with, concurred. Men who intermarried in the 21st century seem the most invested in trying to balance their career pursuits with fatherhood. According to one man who intermarried in 2003, once his son was born, his life ended, as he put it. I believe he meant his role as a carefree adult. it became centered, his life, on his role as a father and doing everything for his son and eventually for his daughter, too. However much men may want to be involved in their children's family lives, the social reality in which they live makes prioritizing family life a real challenge. For Charles Redkin, an accomplished physician, his wife was glad to have a Jewish family, but told him to the extent they're Jewish, he would have to do the work to make it happen. The rationale was not a direct outgrowth of feminist thinking, as one might think, but rather because she's not Jewish and therefore doesn't know how to go about it. And Charles pointed out, the only problem with her theory is that I'm at work 60 or 70 hours per week, which doesn't leave much time to ensure his children's Jewish cultural or religious education. Whether Jewish men want to cut back on their paid labor and increase their time with their families really depends intimately on how they envision their roles as husbands and as fathers. Men are caught wanting to be mensches on the one hand who make the world a better place, and the American rules of masculinity that encourage all men to win, to get ahead, to make more money. Intermarried Jewish men offer insight into a form of gendered ethnicity stemming from their religious and cultural heritage that increases their ability to raise Jewish children equally effectively as intermarried Jewish women. When Jewish men marry Gentile women, their Jewish identities are cast into high relief. The process of becoming fathers further accentuates manifestations of their Jewishness. Hence, the dual experiences of intermarriage and fatherhood interact in such a way as to foreground the cultural meaning of Jewish identity and gender. The dynamic relationship between intermarriage and fatherhood illustrates a new concept of American Jewish identity in the 21st century that is intimately tied to gender perceptions and roles. Understanding intermarried Jewish men's experiences as husbands and fathers is a key step toward establishing gender equality so that both sexes may finally live up to their full human potential. Jewish husbands are not alone navigating manhood and fatherhood within the broader American context. There's likely a relationship between the country's preoccupation with getting fathers to play with their children. Think of President Obama's public service announcements encouraging men to take time to be a dad today. And I have a slide here for that.
So I did end up with a 3-5.
Big study scholars who report the disappearance of Jewish men from communal involvement, with the exception of temple presidents, and the difficulty of attracting them to the professional workforce, suggesting that Jewish men became less involved over time. Now, gender equality is not a woman's issue or a man's issue. It's a human issue. And enabling intermarried Jewish men to better integrate work and family will benefit everyone. The issues of men's involvement in Jewish parenting and the Jewish community really need to be looked at in their larger context. Active Jewish fathering needs to be seen as equally important as providing. Gender will persist in influencing the disproportionately low transmission rate of Jewish identity to children of intermarried Jewish men compared to intermarried Jewish women, so long as men's work outside the home continues to be socially valued more than women's work inside the home. And men's identities continue to be fashioned by what they do rather than who they are. We need to address the troubling fact that millennial children of intermarriage are less likely to be raised Jewish if the father is Jewish than they are if the mother is Jewish. And I'm trying to advance the last slide here. The new interfaith families, next page. to address this fact, and that's part of what the Interfaith Families Jewish Engagement Program is doing here at Hebrew College. And I must say I'm truly privileged and honored to direct this and appreciate the opportunity to do the work that I love and love the work that I do. This program offers clergy, early childhood educators, day school educators, communal Jewish leaders, and Hillel directors et al. The necessary education, theory, and practice to effectively meet interfaith families where they are and draw them into greater engagement with Jewish life. It will also help equalize Jewish parenting so that all parents of all genders can understand the value of their identity building. And these educational programs are designed to make that explicit, this relationship between intermarriage and gender. We need to build communities that are not only pluralistic and inclusive, but also that emphasize egalitarian Jewish parenting. Enabling Jews of all genders to parent Jewish children is essential. Men can and do assume proactive roles raising Jewish children, but they need communal support and education about the value of their Jewish identity work inside the home. I hope you'll join me in directing our energies to fuel this necessary paradigm shift. And to those who are participating in the webinar and interested, I hope that you'll join me in the sacred work. I personally invite your application to the Interfaith Families Jewish Education Program, whether it's a specialization in a Master of Jewish Education degree or a standalone professional development certificate. I welcome you, and I look forward to beginning the learning journey together this fall, 2016. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And Adam, I'm going to hand it off to you for a response.
Thank you very much. Just two small bookkeeping things. One is make sure if you've signed in since we started the call to mute your microphone. There'll be a chance for chatting afterwards. And secondly, if you click the chat window on the upper corner of the WebEx interface, you can type a chat question or comment in, and we'll have a chance to go back and review those once we get to the discussion session of the presentation. In the year 2000, the American Jewish Committee's annual survey of Jewish public opinion asked questions about intermarriage. And the results were so surprising that the questions have not been asked again. Here are just a few examples. They asked if you agreed, "It would pain me that my child married a Gentile." 56% disagreed. "Intermarriage is inevitable in an open society." 80% agreed. "The best response to intermarriage is to encourage the Gentile to convert to Judaism." 68% disagreed. The survey also asked about rabbinic officiation in mixed marriages. Should rabbis officiate even if a Gentile clergyman were involved, a co-officiated wedding? 57% on the survey said yes. Should rabbis only officiate if there were no Gentile clergymen involved? 16% still said they should do it. Rabbis should refuse? Only 22%. What proportion of rabbis today would officiate even by themselves? Far less than the 3/4 of American Jews who wanted them to 16 years ago. Imagine the results today and the effects of today's environment on interfaith families' Jewish choices. In my response, I want to highlight 3 implications of Karen's groundbreaking work. The first is that current demography is not future destiny. The personal experience of intermarriage can actually be a motivation to reconnect with Jewish identity, just as an experience of rejection when getting married or looking for a community could push you away. The 1990 National Jewish Population Survey showed a smaller percentage of intermarrieds raising Jewish children, at least in part because of experiences of rejection, trying to find a rabbi to marry them in the 1980s when very, very few did. And Jewish men in those days were more likely to intermarry than Jewish women, and thus their children were more likely to be alienated by, quote, "You're not really Jewish." 25 years later, Jewish choices by intermarried households are more common for many reasons. Intermarriage itself is more common. Couples are more likely to find a supportive rabbi for their wedding, and they are certainly more likely to find a welcoming community. It's no accident that conservative Judaism has lost market share to reform and to none of the above. Today, intermarriage is a normative Jewish experience. It's something that happens to half of all Jews getting married, and thus, through family and social connections, affects everyone. Second implication, reality is complicated. It's not simply a question of intermarried or in-married. Gender matters, and not just for the parents. Former Secretary of Defense William Cohen was raised Jewish with a very Jewish family name of Cohen. He identified with his Jewish father, but after being denied a bar mitzvah, he signed off from being Jewish. Yet there are plenty of bar mitzvahs that take place with names like Sean Finnegan, whose mother is the Jewish one. Does gender also matter for child-to-parent identification and thus future identity? Karen said in her book that Jewish men felt strongly about their sons being Jews. But what about their daughters who might want to identify with their non-Jewish mother? As Karen mentioned, the dynamic of same-sex partnerships vis-a-vis gender and Jewish identity also could have very interesting answers. I know that Karen would also be interested in these questions and many more. The reality is complicated, but identity is also complicated. Let me add one more layer. Pew Forum's 2013 Portrait of Jewish Americans showed that 1/3 of millennial Jews are, quote, Jews of no religion, variously called ethnic Jews, cultural Jews, secular Jews. Jews of no religion are more likely to intermarry than Jews by religion. However, 1/3 of American millennials overall are religious nuns, so a young secular Jew could easily marry a young secularized Christian who wants a Christmas tree but never goes to church, a partnership that's more intercultural than interfaith. I sometimes call these secular-secular partnerships interfaithless marriages. A secular Jew could marry a religious Christian, or a non-Jewish atheist could marry a liberal religious Jew, or you could have a truly interfaith partnership that addressed the same God with different vocabulary, and they may choose one primary faith or choose to celebrate both. When all of these varieties make identity choices for their home or their children, they will each have very different needs and very different priorities. Reality is complicated. Third implication. The study of intermarriage is also the study of Jewishness. It's a new world, this world of intermarriage as a normative Jewish experience. Some of us accepted this a long time ago. My home movement of secular humanistic Judaism affirmed the Jewish right to marry for love in the early 1970s, the same time the Reform CCAR explicitly rejected it. However, estimates today are that half of Reform rabbis will perform intermarriages under varying conditions. The complicated Jewish reality today is that there is no universal Jewish normative. Is being Jewish about religion? Is it ancestry and culture? Is it both? A majority of American Jews say it's ancestry and culture rather than religion, or both. But the truth is there is no one right answer. What speaks to some will not speak to others. Synagogue affiliation in America is now a minority experience, as it was in the 1930s and unlike the 1960s. Most American Jews celebrate Passover and Hanukkah, while a small minority, maximum 20%, keep kosher or observe Shabbat. What does typically Jewish or Jewish normative mean when intermarriage is more common than kashrut? Jewish is what many Jews do, then intermarriage is a key aspect of being Jewish today. We can think, in conclusion, of the benefits of Jewish feminism, not only to Jewish women, but also to Jewish men and Jewish communities and Jewish leadership and the rabbinic profession and Jewish writing and all the other areas that women have had a profound impact on Jewish life since Jewish feminism. Just imagine the impact of opening Jewish doors to interfaith families to welcome them, to encourage them to make Jewish choices. Imagine how that will transform the Jewish experience for everyone else. So now I want to open up to any comments or questions. You can certainly unmute and talk. It could be to myself, to Karen, or you can if you prefer to type a chat, just make sure you're chatting to everybody, and we can have a chance for an open conversation.
Thank you, Adam. Let's give it a moment for people just to marinate for a second, and then we'll take some questions anytime.
While we're waiting for questions, perhaps I can just share a thought about what Rabbi Shalom shared with us, which I very much appreciate, and that is, it relates to pretty much everything that he said in his response, which has to do with intermarriage as an opportunity. And that is an opportunity for Jews who have fallen in love with someone of another faith or cultural background to draw closer and to learn alongside their spouses and particularly alongside their children. I think this is an area that's little discussed and merits much more discussion and really validation. You know, the opportunity to attend programs that are designed for very young children can be very beneficial for Jews who did not have the same education, you know, were not privy to that Jewish education when they were growing up, and to emphasize that folks don't need to feel. I think this is particularly a gendered phenomenon until there's such a thing as Jewish GPS. The idea that you know, it's harder sometimes for men to ask questions or because they feel like they should know something. And I think one of the things we need to emphasize as we do our Interfaith Families Jewish Engagement work is that everyone has the opportunity to learn alongside their children.
Thank you. Susan, I think you have a question?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Okay, great. I wanted to thank Rabbi Adam for the work of secular humanistic Judaism in welcoming interfaith and intercultural families in general. And I wanted to thank Karen for her important work as somebody who was raised in Reform Judaism with a Jewish father and a Protestant mother prior to 1983. It's really encouraging to see this kind of work get underway finally. I wanted to make two sort of advocacy points growing out of my work for my book, which surveyed and interviewed children of interfaith families that were raising children with both family religions. One is that as this field goes forward, as Hebrew College develops this program, I would urge all of you in Jewish leadership to really consider engaging with the very significant percentage of families that are raising kids partly Jewish and partly something else. Those are the, you know, the words of Pew Research on this. It's about 25%. So excluding those families, to me, is deeply problematic. Engaging them when they are families who want to engage with Judaism makes a lot of sense to me. The other point is just that as somebody who is a quote-unquote patrilineal, the idea of matrilineal descent is making less and less sense to me as time goes by, as we have families who are single parent, who have two fathers, who have two mothers. You know, what does matrilineal descent even mean in that kind of context? And I know Karen was sort of getting at that, but I just wanted to raise the point again, because especially those of us who did grow up with Jewish fathers who made a lot of effort to have us become Jewish kids, it's still very discouraging out there. Even in a Reformed Jewish context, I continue to get excluded by people who just have a very, to me, archaic mentality about this. Thanks.
If I can respond for one moment, thank you, Susan, for the work that you're doing. And I have to say, we need to fire what I call the ethnic bouncers, the people who feel like it's their self-appointed job to kick Jews out who want to be part of the Jewish community, like they're enforcing some kind of matrilineal purity or something. It's a disservice to Jewish life. And if they don't want them in their synagogues, then that's their choice to discriminate. But that doesn't mean they get to tell them they're not Jewish or they don't have a Jewish home where they can find a meaningful connection. Our movement has accepted self-identification as Jewish or from either parent since at least the late 1980s, but in practice even before then. And I think that that's going to be the direction people move. If you say you're Jewish, mazel tov. That should be sufficient, because in the end, we can either complain that there are too few Jews and then keep the barriers high, or we can complain that the barriers are low, but everybody's getting in and it's getting bigger. But you can't complain that you want high barriers and there's too few people here. I think we should lower the barriers and let them in.
I'd like to add on to what Adam just responded with, and first to thank Susan for her work, and also to plug her book, Being Both, which is well worth reading, and to say that I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. With respect to what Adam just said, I also want to make the point that I think in support of pluralism, that it's important to be accepting and respectful across the spectrum, rather than determine, and I don't think that, Adam, you were doing this, but I just want to make the point to our participants that, you know, it's up to the individual, yes, to self-identify, and then also to affiliate, observe, and participate in the ways that feel right to them. What I'd love to do away with is any of the judgment, and to dismantle the hierarchy of Judaism, if you will, or Jewishness, rather, which I know that many Jews, patrilineal Jews especially, but all Jews, many Jews, I should say, feel to varying extents, you know, that somehow they're not Jewish enough, or they're not doing something that qualifies them. I think that at Susan's point also about how she's been responded to, which also Adam touched on, I think that we need to all hang tough because change is hard and takes time, but there is progress. Certainly Adam's movement illustrates that very well, and it's been underway for a long time. But also among the other movements, I do see progress. I do think change is possible, but it takes time, it takes discussion, and it really takes listening to people, listening more than speaking sometimes, and opening hearts and broadening minds, which is what we're in the business of doing.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions before we wrap up?
I have a question. I'm on the phone. Is that okay?
Great, please, we can hear you.
I don't think that it's the underlying thought. I think there's an underlying thought that is probably not being expressed, or I hope there is. There's a lot of, I'm hearing a lot of conversation about quantity, about numbers of Jews, and much less about what is this Judaism that's being practiced. For me, a primary concern is what is the nature of Judaism that Jews are looking for these days, which would be something that is qualitatively and spiritually nourishing and worthy of being passed on from one generation to the next. My concern about numbers are not my concern. Quality, I have a lot of faith in Judaism, and I think Judaism can sell itself. It's possible that the focus of the webinar is the way I sense it to be, because that's the expertise and that's the point of this particular webinar. I wonder whether people think of that and think what people think about quality versus quantity. And the other question I have to address is the issue of schooling children in more than one religion. I have a lot of experience working with marginally or unaffiliated Jewish families, and I have found time and time again that when children are educated in more than one religion, and the expectation is that they'll choose what they want then when they get older, what a young child hears under that set of circumstance is you can choose mommy or you can choose daddy, or you can choose this mommy or this daddy or that daddy. It's not a question of religion at that point, and it really messes emotionally with young children.
And Leanne, thank you for that perspective. Do either of our scholars want to respond before we have one more comment that's come up in the chat?
I would like to say that I appreciate the comment about quality more than quantity. I guess I'm not clear from the caller whether you're talking about qualitative research versus quantitative research, or I think you meant the quality of Judaism and what we're actually offering people. My response to that would be that we need to offer a plethora of choices so that the quality of Judaism, which I believe is inherent, will come across to people and be appealing to them in different ways, and speak to them and nourish them, as you said. With regard to both, I think Susan may want to chime in on that. I'll just say that I think that the idea behind that thinking, at least from my perspective, has to do with the difficulty that interfaith families face and the importance of being sensitive to that difficulty, the challenge that the individuals involved are going through, and to be supportive and to offer them resources and to be very clear about not putting any children in the position of choosing between parents, but rather with the hope that if children are educated in one or more religions, that Judaism and the beauty of it, and as we see through various examples, including that third generation image at the very beginning of the webinar of Michael Douglas, his father and his son, of there being an appeal of Judaism that will attract people, if not in the second generation, then perhaps in the third. So rather than exposing children to no religion at all, or cultural heritage at all, to give them as much support and education as possible would be my vote.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I hope the caller will read my book, which describes a more formal system of interfaith education for interfaith kids, which is very different from the sort of doing nothing that I think a lot of families have done in prior generations when they tried to do both. I'd also like to say that I hope that going forward, programs like this will include the voices of grown interfaith children. A lot of us are adults now, and I think it's important that we be included in these conversations rather than the conversation being about us, sort of nothing about us without us. Thanks.
And thank you for being here to make that true here. Just one comment I want to read before we close up so that Randall gets heard. But Randall says he's currently doing research on engaging interfaith families in Toronto. He says there are only 2 to 3 rabbis in Toronto who perform intermarriages, a community of almost 200,000 Jews. Just to offer a comparative context, these are secular humanist rabbis. I'm taking that as the ones who will do it. So that's interesting. I mean, I think when we look at Canadian communities, they do tend to, and other diaspora communities, they tend to operate a little bit different than those in the United States. And I think Randall's pointing that out for us, that this, what we're talking about is somewhat unique to the United States. So thank you, Randall, for that comment. So I want to, be attuned to our time here, and even though I know the conversation on much longer. We hope, with our new center, that we can keep this conversation going for years to come, and hopefully really be bringing out trained educators in the field to have a deeper knowledge, understanding, and practice of this work and the nuances which are required to really create a truly diverse community. So thank you to everyone for being here today. And we can stay on, those of us at Hebrew College can stay on for a couple of minutes in case anyone has any questions about the work that we're doing. We're always happy to share it. If you want to share the link to this webinar with anyone, please let us know. We are certainly happy to share it so that even those who weren't able to be with us today can join. So thank you to Adam and to Karen and to all of you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.